Anthem, a new IP from RPG legends at BioWare, was one of the biggest surprises of E3 2017. The Destiny-inspired, so-called persistent online shooter looked really good and, what's more, was supposed to be released sometime in 2018, nearly a year and a half since the initial reveal. That, however, turned out to be too good to be true. The game has recently been pushed to 2019, and according to some insider information, the production has its own share of problems. As for BioWare, it might be a project that, if unsuccessful, can irreversibly damage the studio and even potentially destroy it. It all comes down to Jason Schreier's article, in which we learned that, according to anonymous BioWare employees, the development team is under a lot of pressure, and as of now, almost all of BioWare has been moved to work on the project, halting the simultaneous development of the new Dragon Age game at the same time. So, what's all the controversy about, and why is Anthem so important for BioWare? Let's have a look. From a gameplay perspective, Anthem will offer both single and multiplayer modes. As the so-called freelancer, we will don a powerful exoskeleton and fight monsters inhabiting an exotic planet. It's easy to see where BioWare got its inspiration from. The game looks a lot like Activision's Destiny and seems to share the same gameplay concept. And that seems like a bold, if not reckless move on the part of the developers, known not for multiplayer shooters, but for RPG games. Before you dismiss Anthem as nothing more than a Destiny clone, it's worth mentioning that, unlike Destiny, it might actually have an interesting story and lore once we get to experience it. The game's script is being written by Drew Karpyshyn, known for the first KOTOR, Mass Effect, and Jade Empire, who, apart from making video game scripts, also has some experience with novels, like the Darth Bane books and the Mass Effect novel tie-ins. However, seeing that we don't know much about the story as of now, and what we do know isn't as promising as one would hope, it remains to be seen if Karpyshyn's influence can actually benefit the project. Apart from that, what we find worrisome are EA's plans for the game. It hasn't been even released yet, but the publisher already claims that the game will be a start of a 10-year adventure. And well, counting your chickens before they hatch isn't a good way to go about making a video game, in my opinion. So let's go back to Schreier's article for a bit. According to his BioWare sources, apart from pressure from EA, the developers also suffer low morale due to misinformation and hateful rhetoric from gamers and YouTubers, because while EA is indeed a big publisher, it's not the worst company on the face of the planet, and once you take a look inside its corporate structure, it turns out that it's much more complex than it might initially seem. And in my humble opinion, that's utter bullshit. Sure, there are trolls and haters who shit on certain companies and IPs purely out of principle, but overall, it's not like that at all. People complain about EA because of their shady practices and being lied to, and not for any other reason than that. If EA's messages were clear and direct, there would be no so-called misinformation, because it's EA who's responsible for the misinformation itself. Most of the time, we're simply kept in the dark, and often aren't even told about game sales, because when EA sends a certain message to the gamers, they say something entirely different to their investors behind closed doors. Take this statement for example. In the recent interview with the Wall Street Journal regarding Anthem's delay, Blake Jorgensen, EA's chief financial officer, said that people are trying to create a story, and the game isn't in fact being delayed, it's just being released later. Soon after, someone at EA took notice of Jorgensen's lying to our faces and sent out Andrew Wilson to do some damage control. Regardless of how it's being portrayed, we're not looking at that as a delay. We've chosen to launch Anthem in the 4th quarter. The date is chosen by portfolio balance, not product readiness. And we're really excited by the way the new Battlefield is shaping up. It probably doesn't make too much sense to launch Anthem right by it. As a new IP, it probably makes sense to give Anthem its own launch window. If the publisher can't even admit that the game is being delayed without some corporate jargon and trying to paint a different picture, it's hard to blame journalists and content creators for the quote-unquote misinformation. It's not gamers' fault that people are dissatisfied with EA, but EA itself. What if EA had just said that they want to give both Battlefield and Anthem enough room and not release them close to one another from the start? Would that have been so hard? Yes, because it's EA and they're always up to something. To add insult to injury, one of Schreier's sources says that 2018 was never a realistic launch date for the project, and EA knew that. So make of that what you will. On the other hand though, if the game is so important for BioWare, then I think we'll do it good to come out later rather than sooner. According to the sources, EA has big expectations for the title when it comes to its sales and revenue from in-game purchases, and as one of the sources stresses, if Anthem fails, BioWare might look very different from what we came to know. What does all of that mean? Well, laying off some staff or even potentially closing down the studio in the near future. I know that might sound absurd, but it's not impossible and quite likely if Anthem indeed turns out to be a flop. Just look at what happened to BioWare Montreal, one of the 3 remaining BioWare studios. After the disappointing Andromeda, the studio has essentially disbanded and its employees were taken over by EA Motive. Even though some sources deduct that the game sold quite okay, it didn't sell as well as the previous game upon launch. And taking into account EA's often high sale expectations, it looks like if BioWare is the next developer that EA will slowly reduce in size and eventually close down because it's not meeting its sale expectations, just like Visceral and many other studios before them. Let's take a quick look at BioWare's history. When EA bought BioWare in 2007, the developer had only one studio in Canada's Edmonton. In the 10 years under the EA brand, their numbers increased so that they had various studios around the world. 2 in Canada, 3 in the USA, and even 1 in Ireland. During that time, BioWare released the critically acclaimed Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect 2. Later, the lackluster Dragon Age 2, the beloved yet in some aspects disappointing Mass Effect 3, and finally, Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda, both of which strayed from the roots of their respective series a bit, and both of which, despite different levels of success, divided their fan bases. Next to that, BioWare also experimented with online games, like in 2011's Old Republic, which, while certainly a good game, quickly became free-to-play nearly a year after its launch. The studio also experienced some failures, both with the cancelled Warhammer MOBA and the new Command & Conquer game. All in all, the studio has had its share of victories, but it also experienced failure, and the latter seems to have an overall greater effect. Over time, BioWare slowly started to collapse under its too rapid growth and was reduced to only 3 studios, in Edmonton, Austin, and Montreal. And those quickly became reduced to only 2 studios after the Andromeda fiasco. And if 70% on Metacritic and initially some buzz surrounding bad animations, which got later fixed, can make EA chop off a significant part of a studio, I'm worried what might happen when the studio underperforms yet again. So, to sum up, even if, after the release of Anthem, BioWare would get back to making the 4th Dragon Age game, which would sell significantly thanks to brand recognition alone, we still need to wait for it a while, as, according to the sources, the project was recently rebooted because BioWare and EA wanted to work on a different method of in-game payments and implementing new content. But if Anthem underperforms, who says that EA won't simply close BioWare down? It's not like they haven't done similar things before, and if the fears of the anonymous developers who talked to Schreier are any indication, some BioWare employees are scared of just that. And there's also the case of the project itself. It just seems so unlike BioWare, you know? The studio was always known for good RPG games, and that's the genre they're most comfortable with and seems to have the biggest experience with. Why would they make such a sudden shift and try to mimic a popular IP? One might be under the impression that, even though BioWare has been planning the new IP for a few years now, the decision to try to clone Destiny gameplay-wise at least, might have been in some level influenced by EA. In conclusion, Anthem, while a new IP, and there's never too much of those if I'm honest, is not necessarily what we would want from BioWare, but as the studio has subverted our expectations before, I hope they'll be able to surprise us again. If not, I just pray that the Destiny lookalike won't sink this once legendary studio.